Coming up are the top 10 most iconic American motorcycles, and they are delicious. In at number 10, the Pierce 4. The Pierce 4 was advertised as the Pierce vibrationless motorcycle, and the company claimed that their motorcycle would give motor car comfort and travel comfortably from a mere walking pace up to the speed of the motor car. Pierce also insisted that the motorcycle be manufactured to the highest standards of workmanship and utilize the finest materials. The drive shaft to the rear wheel formed a structural element of the frame, while the large diameter tubes used for the chassis doubled up as a fuel tank. At $350, it was the most expensive motorcycle of its time, but the company still lost money on everyone. In 5 years, approximately 3,500 were built. In at number 9, the Indian Scout. By the 1920s, Indian was producing very high-quality motorcycles, and the 1920 Indian Scout was another big step forward for the company. A relatively small 605cc V-twin engine was fitted to a suitably scaled-down chassis, and the transmission was bolted to the engine crankcases, enabling maintenance-free gear primary drive, unique in American motorcycles of the time. In 1928, the Scout 101 with its 750cc V-twin engine was released, which has often been referred to as the most important motorcycle Indian made from the beginning of the company to the beginning of the Second World War. In at number 8, Ner-A-Car. There have been many attempts to reinvent the motorcycle, and one of the more unusual was the Ner-A-Car, produced between 1921 and 1926. It was an attempt to narrow the gap between the automobile and the motorcycle, and it was manufactured in both America and the UK. It featured a car-type perimeter steel channel chassis, while the engine was mounted so the crankshaft ran longitudinally, necessitating a complex friction drive arrangement to take drive to the rear wheel via chain. Even more unusual was the hub-center steering arrangement and the foot-forward riding position. In total, 16,000 Ner-A-Cars were produced, making it the most successful hub-center steered motorcycle ever. In at number 7, the Indian 4. Four-cylinder engines bloomed large in American motorcycling in the pre-war years. In 1927, Indian bought the Ace Motor Corporation and started using the four-cylinder engine in its own chassis, creating the Indian Ace. The Indian 4 somehow survived the ravages of the Great Depression and would be produced by Indian until 1942, when all Indian production was turned over to building motorcycles for the Army. After the war, the Indian 4 didn't reappear and production was limited to the chief model. In at number 6, the Ace. The Ace Motor Corporation was started by William G. Henderson after he sold Henderson Motorcycle to Schwinn. Production started in 1920 but ended in 1924 after a bankruptcy. Eventually, Indian bought the rights and tooling for Ace. Ace used an unusual layout, a longitudinal four-cylinder with a chain drive, very similar to that of Henderson motorcycles. In my opinion, the Aces look much better than the earlier Hendersons. Because production only lasted for 4 years on the original run, these are very rare motorcycles. In at number 5, the Harley-Davidson WLA. In the pantheon of legendary Harley-Davidson models, the WLA might not have as much currency as the famed Knuckle-Head, but it is just as important in the general history of the company as the 70,000 or so produced during World War II ensured the prosperity of the company after the war had ended, not to mention being important in the rise of biker culture post-war, as returning GIs would acquire surplus bikes and customize or BOV them. This bike was powered by the latest development of the flathead engine, with higher compression, allowing the use of poor quality gasoline, and was widely adopted by the US Armed Forces, as well as being exported in large numbers to Russia, UK, and South Africa. In at number 4, the Harley-Davidson Knuckle-Head. Up to 1936, Harley-Davidson engines had been of a flathead, side valve design, but, as would happen later in Harley's history, demand for ever more power was overstressing the engine, leading to chronic overheating and unreliability. Harley's solution was to develop an overhead valve cylinder head which, even though not without its teething problems due to severe oil leakage from over-complex joint faces, was a huge step forward for the company. Knuckle-Head was actually a nickname bestowed on the engine by 1960s-era custom bike builders and came from the shape of the rocker covers, which resembled the knuckles on a clenched fist. In at number 3, the Harley-Davidson XLCH Sportster. 1950s, the US economy was booming once again, and people had surplus money with which to satisfy the ever-increasing consumer itch. Harley-Davidson needed a product to directly compete with the lighter, sportier British motorcycles that were being imported in ever greater numbers, and the result was the Sportster, developed from the side-valve PH model and featuring an overhead valve engine. Dealer feedback gave Harley a direction in terms of styling, and the Sportster, as we know it today, was born. If in later years the Sportster was looking old-fashioned for the first 30 years of its 50-plus years production life, it was a typically American take on the lightweight roadster motorcycle. In at number 2, the Harley-Davidson Electra-Glide. The 1960s were a period of change for Harley-Davidson. At the end of the 1950s, swing-arm rear suspension had been adopted, and then the shovel-head engine replaced the panhead engine in 1965. But that wasn't the only innovation. In 1965, 12-volt electrics and electric start was fitted for the first time, creating the Electra-Glide. But the most significant development was an accessories package that included panniers and a touring screen, a response to customers fitting aftermarket touring accessories. In 1969, the batwing fairing was announced, and by 1971, these accessories were fitted as standard, creating the first full-dress tourer. Even BMW hadn't got that far in the 1960s. And now for today's number 1. The Harley-Davidson FXST Softail. In 1981, a management consortium bought Harley-Davidson back from AMF and set about saving the company. The first all-new model of this new regime was the FXST Softail, which introduced the world to not only the all-new, largely aluminum Evolution engine, but also the new Softail frame, which looked like a hardtail design, but actually hid the rear suspension coilover shocks under the seat. Despite it being a Harley trademark, the Softail concept was originally designed in the 1970s by a mechanical engineer named Bill Davis and patented by him in 1976. Harley-Davidson originally turned down the Softail concept, but the company later relented, buying the rights. The new Evolution engine was much more powerful and, crucially, reliable than the Ion shovelhead engine, and helped the new Harley to become an instant success, defining the decade to come for the American manufacturer. So there it is, our top 10 iconic American motorcycles. Let us know in the comments if you think that we'd have missed any.